800 souls on the brink, one wrong move, and Africa would lose them forever. In the heart of West Africa, where borders cut like scars across the Sahel, silence can be as lethal as bullets. For years, whispers spoke of convoys that vanished into the desert, of children who never saw another sunrise, of women reduced to shadows in transit houses. Few believed, fewer acted. But when the hour came, when over 800 lives hung by a thread, one man gave the order that could not be undone. He was not chasing glory. He was not chasing power. He was chasing something weightier, dignity itself. Tonight, we are not telling a story of charity, not pity, but sovereignty. We are entering the storm where hesitation means betrayal and where courage redraws the map of Africa. Stay with us. This is not just news, it is a battle for dignity. Subscribe and stand with us. The capital city of Ouagadougou does not sleep easily. Beneath its flickering streetlights and dusty avenues, a shadow empire had thrived in silence. It was not an empire of gold or oil, but of flesh. Men, women, and children moved like cargo across invisible highways. Its value was measured not in lives saved, but in profits counted. 500 million CFA, $150 million, 30 million euros a year. Numbers that should never be placed beside human names. For years, rumors drifted through refugee camps on the edge of the Sahara. Families spoke of daughters who left and never returned, of boys who vanished from border villages in Niger and Burkina Faso, of infants carried away under the guise of medical aid. The desert swallowed their stories. Officials dismissed them as exaggerations, statistics that could not be verified. But maps do not lie. Intelligence officers began to pin red dots across the Sahel, safe houses in Gao, warehouses near Saba, ports in Zouara. And those dots multiplied until the map looked less like geography and more like a wound. At the center of the wound stood the unthinkable, a network that not only trafficked human beings, but harvested their organs. Pregnant women were sedated and tagged. Children were separated by blood type. Invoices recorded organs as if they were commodities: hearts, kidneys, corneas. The scale was staggering, but the silence around it was even louder. Someone powerful was protecting it, someone at the top of government. And so Captain Ibrahim Traoré, faced with intelligence too damning to ignore, gave the command: lock the files, trust no one. We move tonight. No celebration, no ceremony, just a decision forged under the weight of history. The first mission was a raid on a warehouse 22 kilometers from the Malian border. At 04:13 hours, 5 armored vehicles advanced through scrubland without headlights, guided only by the cold eye of a surveillance drone. The structure appeared ordinary: corrugated steel, 2 floors, no sign of activity. But the heat maps told another story: clusters too dense for machinery, temperatures too high for storage. The breach was silent: bolt cutters, not explosives; flashbangs suppressed, not unleashed. And then came the sound that confirmed every nightmare: muffled knocking, the rattle of chains, a child's cry piercing through steel. Soldiers converged, locks snapped, and the first container opened. What they saw could never be unseen. Limbs tangled, bodies pressed tighter than cargo, air heavy with sweat, infection, and fear. Women clutching infants, boys no older than 7 with wrists bound, old men too weak to rise. One little girl reached out with trembling hands, whispering, "Don't let them take me again." Her voice was thin as paper, but it carried the weight of a continent's conscience. 9 containers were opened that night. 172 souls pulled back from the abyss. 49 children, 19 of them under the age of 5. 72 women, many bearing fresh scars. 51 men forced into unpaid labor. Some collapsed the moment the doors opened, too weak to stand. Others clung to soldiers as if they had been waiting for this moment all their lives. Medics worked furiously: glucose shots, blankets, water passed from hand to hand. A few victims would not survive the night without evacuation. Helicopters were inbound, but time was the enemy. And as the soldiers tended to the living, Gunfire cracked against the warehouse walls. The traffickers had been warned. Someone inside the state had betrayed them. The battle was swift and brutal. Bullets ricocheted against steel, smoke grenades turned the night opaque, and masked men fought with the precision of trained units, not mere criminals. Within minutes, 3 were dead, 2 captured, 1 escaped into the desert. But their desperation told its own story. They were not defending territory, they were defending cargo. Lives were currency, and currency cannot be lost. Among the captured was a man carrying military-grade encrypted equipment, European build, far beyond the reach of local militias. It was the first undeniable proof that this empire was not simply African. Its veins stretched across oceans, its heart pumped with foreign money, its breath carried by silence from capitals far beyond Ouagadougou. That night, under the dim light of flickering bulbs, Captain Traoré stood at the threshold of a container. Children blinked into freedom, unsure whether to believe the dawn was truly theirs. In that silence, the captain knew this was not the end of the operation. It was only the first step into a storm that would test every thread of loyalty and every boundary of courage. But even as the warehouse fell quiet, intelligence whispered of something larger. A convoy was already on the move, carrying hundreds more into the desert night. Could they be intercepted before they vanish forever? The desert does not forgive hesitation. By the time the warehouse was secured, new intelligence came through the crackle of a satellite line. A convoy was already moving north. 4 vehicles, armed guards, human cargo hidden inside. If they crossed into Mali, they would vanish into the arteries of the Sahara, swallowed by sand and silence. Captain Ibrahim Traoré gave no speech. He simply raised his hand and the pursuit began. 2 helicopters roared into the sky, blades cutting through the storm of dust. On the ground, armored vehicles surged forward, engines growling against the hard clay. The chase was relentless and the stakes higher than any battlefield. The convoy did not scatter. It moved with precision, as if choreographed. One truck peeled away, another slowed deliberately, baiting the soldiers into misdirection. But Traoré did not bite. His eyes locked on the lead vehicle. "That is the one, he ordered. "Hold the line. Box them in." Gunfire erupted from the ridge. Bullets carved sparks against steel. One Burkinabè soldier fell wounded. Another dragged him to cover without pause. The captain remained in the lead vehicle, helmet low, rifle steady. When the moment came, he gave the signal. Rounds tore into the tires of the front truck, forcing it into a spin that ended against a boulder. Dust rose like smoke from a fire. From the twisted door stepped a man in a dark jacket. Tall, calm, a briefcase in one hand. He did not run. He did not fire. He simply looked straight at Captain Traoré and smiled. "You are late," he said. They called him the gatekeeper. His name was not in any official file, but his influence had traveled unseen across borders for years. In his briefcase were 2 biometric locked drives. One bore the label South Route, the other Client Ledger. Inside those drives lay the architecture of an empire. Routes, accounts, buyers, officials. If the data was lost, the network would scatter like smoke. If it was saved, the silence would break forever. But the drives were booby-trapped. Within minutes, a purge began. 40% of the data wiped itself before their eyes. The gatekeeper laughed. "You do not have the keys." "We do." For a heartbeat, it seemed the operation would collapse into failure. Years of testimony, trails of blood, evidence of collusion, all erased in seconds. Soldiers clenched their jaws. Commanders cursed under their breath. But in the corner of the operations room, a young analyst spoke. His voice was hesitant but steady. "We cloned the packets as they moved. We mirrored the purge. We have everything." The room froze. Captain Traoré turned, eyes narrowing. "Show me." On the screens, transaction logs reappeared like ghosts returning from exile. Accounts in Panama. Real estate purchases in Nairobi. Crypto transfers routed through Estonia. Signatures from ministries, contractors, even foreign security firms. The purge had failed. The shadows had left footprints. The revelation struck like thunder. This was not a scattered group of bandits. This was a machine lubricated by politics and profit, guarded by uniforms, legitimized by silence. How many officials had shaken hands by day and signed death warrants by night? How many governments had looked the other way for the sake of stability? For the first time, the gatekeeper's smile faltered. Just a flicker, but enough. His arrogance cracked under the weight of his own evidence. Traoré leaned forward, voice steady as stone. You thought you were a ghost. But even shadows bleed when the light comes. The convoy had been stopped, but the battle was far from over. The mirrored drives mapped dozens of sites, warehouses branded as logistics companies, safe houses disguised as clinics, containers moving under fake NGO seals. Each was a vein in a body that stretched across the Sahel. To cut it down, they would need to strike not once, but everywhere, and strike without warning. In the capital, whispers had already begun. Ministers spoke in hushed tones. Generals avoided eye contact. Everyone knew the truth. If the leaks came from inside the state, then no rank, no medal, no office could be trusted. Traoré made it clear no one would be spared. If betrayal wore a uniform, it would be treated like the enemy. As dusk fell, a new storm gathered. The decision was made. Operation Falcon would launch at noon the following day, striking 5 sites across 3 regions simultaneously. No time to rest, no time to hesitate. The files had turned the whispers of rumor into the weight of evidence. The moment for silence was over. But if corruption had already climbed to the highest levels of government, what resistance would they face when they dared to bring the storm home? When the dust settled, numbers spoke louder than any speech. By dusk, the tallies were confirmed. 832 people had been pulled back from the abyss. 427 were children, more than 90 of them under the age of 10. 320 were women, at least 21 pregnant. 85 were men, many of them enslaved in mines scattered across the eastern corridors of Burkina Faso and southern Mali. Statistics can numb the heart, but each number had a name. Each child had once whispered in the dark, hoping someone would answer. Each woman had carried her fear as visibly as her unborn child. Each man had been condemned to dig gold from the earth without ever touching freedom. The rescue was monumental, but it also revealed the scale of the wound. Medics described dehydration so severe that veins collapsed, infections untreated for weeks, trauma etched into young faces like scars carved too deep. Some would recover. Many would carry invisible wounds for life. Psychologists warned that without long-term support, the rescued could become lost again, this time not to traffickers, but to despair. The shock did not end in the clinics. It reached the heart of government. Among the detained were 2 senior intelligence officers, a former deputy minister of trade, and contractors with links to foreign private military firms. One was instantly recognizable to journalists. A man once photographed standing behind President Alassane Ouattara of Côte d'Ivoire at a United Nations speech in Geneva. Now the same man appeared in shackles before cameras. The betrayal was not just criminal. It was political. Burkina Faso had faced coups before, but this was something deeper. How could citizens trust a state whose veins had pumped poison? Families who had doubted the rumors now demanded answers. Who knew? Who benefited? Who signed the forms, stamped the papers, authorized the convoys? Silence was no longer an option. Economists began to trace the hidden economy behind the scandal. Mining zones in eastern Burkina Faso had been feeding not just gold markets, but trafficking routes. Fake NGOs funneled funds through Malta, Singapore, and the Seychelles disguised as aid shipments. Offshore accounts in Panama and Cyprus carried the profits, while crypto transfers moved through Estonia in the dead of night. The line between commerce and crime blurred until both were indistinguishable. This was not only about saving lives, it was about sovereignty. Could a nation survive when its own institutions had been infiltrated? Could a continent move forward when international courts held more power than local tribunals? For the African Union, the operation was both triumph and warning. If evidence was handed directly to The Hague, Would Africa ever build its own mechanisms of justice? Or would it remain dependent on external validation, treated as incapable of administering dignity on its own soil? It was here that voices grew louder, demanding a continental tribunal. Pan-Africanists argued that if Captain Ibrahim Traoré could act decisively in 48 hours, then African leaders could no longer hide behind excuses of capacity. Sovereignty meant justice rendered in African courts, not files carried to European capitals. Yet others warned that without international oversight, corruption might simply bury the truth again. The debate mirrored a larger question: aid or trade, pity or partnership, dependence or dignity. Each option carried consequences, each demanded courage. And the people of Burkina Faso, weary of seeing their soil drained and their children stolen, now asked for more than speeches. They asked for accountability. International media scrambled to cover the story. Headlines read like tremors: Africa's largest trafficking empire shattered, the Sahel's hidden war, Burkina Faso's bold gamble. Social networks flooded with images of children wrapped in blankets, their eyes wide with exhaustion and disbelief. In WhatsApp groups across the continent, the same line repeated, "Africa rise." For once, the world was not reading about famine, debt, or foreign aid. It was reading about resistance, about sovereignty, about a landlocked nation refusing to bow. And in that shift, something powerful emerged: a new frame for African leadership, one not built on dependency, but on decisive action. This was the moment when Ibrahim Traoré news ceased to be a headline about one man. It became a mirror for an entire continent. But the storm was not only internal. Foreign capitals were already reacting, calculating what this new defiance meant for their interests in the Sahel. The storm in Ouagadougou did not stay within its borders. Within hours, the ripple reached foreign capitals. The African Union was the first to respond. A statement from Addis Ababa praised the arrests and pledged support for a continental framework to combat cross-border trafficking. Niger's president went further, calling for the creation of a Pan-African tribunal to ensure that justice was not outsourced. Ghana promised to host a regional summit within 30 days, focusing on dismantling trafficking corridors that stretch from the Sahara to the Mediterranean. Beyond Africa, the reactions were more cautious. In Brussels, European Union officials issued a carefully worded note welcoming the disruption of illegal migration routes, but avoided any direct mention of organ trafficking or state complicity. In Washington, diplomats expressed concern about instability in the Sahel, framing the crisis less as a human rights catastrophe and more as a security threat that could fuel extremism. Silence, once again, became a tool of diplomacy. The International Criminal Court in The Hague moved quickly. Within 48 hours, an official case was opened under Article 7 of the Rome Statute, categorizing the crimes as crimes against humanity through human trafficking and organ trade. Files sealed in diplomatic crates were handed over, guarded by international observers. For many Africans, this swift action was both a relief and a reminder. The highest stage of justice still stood outside the continent. Not all reactions were supportive. In Dakar, protesters gathered outside the European Union liaison office, carrying banners that read, "No more blood trade, no more lies." In Paris, business circles whispered uneasily as reports surfaced of French and Canadian companies appearing in seized visitor logs from Amani Logistics in Ouagadougou. In Tel Aviv, questions were raised about how medical-grade tracking implants ended up in the hands of traffickers. Each revelation deepened the sense that this was not a local crime, but a global market operating in plain sight. For the United States and Europe, the dilemma was stark. To support the Burkinabè operation meant confronting networks that might implicate their own nationals and corporations. To ignore it meant risking credibility in a region where influence was already slipping. The balance between moral obligation and geopolitical interest was as fragile as glass. Within Africa, meanwhile, whispers turned darker. Reports surfaced of plots to eliminate those who had dared to shine light into the shadows. Analysts warned that the revelations could trigger backlash from both local collaborators and foreign beneficiaries. Commentators even spoke of a tentative d'assassinat Ibrahim Traoré, an attempt to silence the very figure who had dared to break the chain. Whether rumor or reality, the idea reflected a truth long understood in Africa. Those who confront entrenched powers do not walk in safety. This international dimension reframed the entire operation. It was no longer just about rescuing hundreds from steel containers. It was about whether Africa could claim the authority to protect its people without permission, and whether the world was ready to accept an Africa that no longer bowed. But dismantling one network was not the end. It was only the beginning of a larger reckoning, where every ally and every adversary would be forced to choose a side. The files seized in Ouagadougou were not just evidence. They were a mirror reflecting a continent's most painful contradictions. On one side, resilience, the courage of soldiers who stormed warehouses, of medics who poured water into parched mouths, of children who survived cages. On the other side, betrayal, the signatures of ministers, the seals of fake NGOs, the bank accounts that turn human beings into balance sheets. What comes next is not guaranteed. Three paths stretch before Africa. The first is the path of denial. Networks may adapt, routes may shift, traffickers may rebuild in silence. Without vigilance, the victory of today could become the tragedy of tomorrow. This is the road most familiar, where wounds are covered but never healed. The second is the path of dependence. Files carried to The Hague, cases debated in foreign courts, justice outsourced once again. It may deliver convictions, but it will not deliver sovereignty. To many, this path feels safer, but it leaves Africa as a witness in its own story, not the author. The third is the path of dignity, a continental tribunal. Cooperation between states that once mistrusted each other. Shared intelligence, shared prosecutions, shared resolve. A recognition that if traffickers operate across borders, then justice must do the same. This is the most difficult road, but it is the only one that builds sovereignty, brick by brick. Captain Ibrahim Traoré himself framed the struggle not as a war against crime, but as a war for dignity. His words struck deeper than statistics. They suggested that sovereignty is not measured by flags or speeches, but by the ability to protect the most vulnerable from the abyss. The imagery remains unforgettable. Containers creaking open, children blinking into light after weeks of darkness. It is more than a rescue. It is a metaphor. A continent long trapped in the silence of dependency, stepping into the glare of its own agency. The challenge now is to keep that light burning. The danger is not only traffickers with rifles, but complacency with pens. Every law ignored, every file buried, every whisper silenced. These are weapons as lethal as bullets. And so Africa stands at a crossroads. One path leads back into silence, the other into sovereignty. One path buries dignity, the other harvests it. One path waits for others to act, the other chooses to act for itself. The world is watching, but more importantly, Africa is watching itself. And the question that lingers is no longer whether a nation can resist. It is whether a continent will rise. The files have been sealed in The Hague. But the question remains, what will Africa do with this moment? The images will not fade easily. Rows of children wrapped in blankets, women stepping out of steel containers with trembling legs, men blinking at a sun they thought they would never see again. For once, the story of Africa was not written by outsiders. It was written by calloused hands, steady eyes, and a decision made in silence, but echoed across the world. This is the meaning of sovereignty. It is not measured by aid packages or foreign speeches. It is measured by the courage to protect your own, even when betrayal festers within. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before the press and declared, "This is not a war against crime, it is a war for dignity," he spoke not just for Burkina Faso, but for a continent tired of being defined by what was taken from it. Yet dignity is fragile. Already whispers spread of threats, of plots, of a tentative d'assassinat Ibrahim Traoré because those who dismantle empires of profit make enemies who do not forgive. It is a reminder that sovereignty is not won in a day. It must be defended every sunrise. And so the question remains, what will Africa do with this moment? Will it surrender its files to courts oceans away, or will it build its own chambers of justice? Will it return to silence, or will it insist that no child, no mother, no man ever be sold again? This is why the story matters. Because Ibrahim Traoré news is not simply a headline. It is a call to reimagine power, to place dignity at the center of governance, to demand accountability beyond borders. And as the world debates, the people of Africa already know, if sovereignty is real, it begins here, now, with action. Stay with us. If this story stirred something in you, let it not fade. Subscribe, share, and carry this echo across every border. For when the next chapter is written, let it be said that you did not look away. Because in the end, Ibrahim Traoré news is not about one man. It is about a continent rising,